Welcome to the Quaker Beagle. As always, I'm Dave Cash, and this is the Ins and Outs Vinyl Review.
Yes, welcome to the Ins and Outs Vinyl Review, the show where I take a critical ear to 3 records, 2 from our stock down at Not Just Vintage and 1 from my own personal collection. As you can see behind me, I've not yet cleaned up from Halloween, so do forgive me, and I also apologise, but there's nothing really Halloween themed in this, so at some point I might make a little ghost appear or something like that. But yeah, there is nothing Halloween themed in this, so bear with me. So this week I will be taking a request from Facebook to unbag Led Zeppelin's Swan Song album. There's also something fishy, courtesy of REO Speedwagon, and I will also be having a listen to one of Black Sabbath's mid-70s offerings. And without further ado, let's take a look now at Black Sabbath's Sabotage. This record is fairly well known for supposedly having more lawyers in the studio than band members. In fact, the band was so convinced that their former management were trying to sabotage their careers with all the lawyers and legal documentation that they had to sign during the recording of this very album, that they believed the former managers were in fact trying to sabotage their careers, hence the name. Ozzy and Co open up this album with Hole in the Sky, which is a good, solid rock mood setter. However, almost as soon as it begins, it's suddenly reined back in by track 2, Don't Start Too Late, which is something of a mellow Latin micro song, which serves as nothing more than a palate cleanser for track 3. Track 3 is Symptom of the Universe. It's right back in Sabbath territory with angry guitar riffs, rattling drums throughout, and great crashing cymbals. Ozzy sings, or should I say wails, over the song with great aplomb, and altogether we are listening to a fantastic rock track with everything you would expect from Black Sabbath. The weak point of the album probably comes when we hit Am I Going Insane, the second to last track on the album. It's very weak, it lacks punch, it slows right down, and it plays it safe with a kind of poppy, underwhelming vibe, which is not what you'd expect from Black Sabbath. But it's at this point that we get to probably the more on-the-nose track, track 8, The Writ. This track is clearly intended to take a swipe at the lawyers and the legal wranglings going on behind the scenes, and it doesn't shy away from taking direct digs at their former manager, Patrick Meehan. By this point in the album, the band is pretty much wearing its heart and its anger on its sleeve, as lyrics such as "Are you Satan? Are you man? You've changed in life since it began" are spat out directly in the direction of the lawyers and the former managers. So overall, despite a little bit of bitterness, this is a great record, and the legal wranglings and the coming and goings of lawyers throughout the studio did not seem to affect the overall recording. If anything, maybe it helped improve it, as the band really seemed to put a lot into this record, and it was well received by both fans and critics back in 1975. And if you're a Black Sabbath fan, of course you cannot do without this in your record collection. And this very record will be down at Not Just Vintage by the time you see this video, hopefully, and you'll definitely like the price, hopefully. So if you're a Black Sabbath fan, you'll need this in your collection, which is fortunate because this very record will be down at Not Just Vintage soon, and it will be reasonably priced as always. And next up is the puntastic You Can Tune a Piano But You Can't Tune a Fish by REO Speedwagon. Now, I happen to really like this album. I am a sucker for puns, and it had me hooked from the moment I read the title. And as with all REO albums, or at least most of them, this is a fairly well-paced, middle-of-the-road rock album with some decent tracks, and that's not a bad place to be. By 1978, the band had certainly found their sound and they'd stuck to it, and so they produced an album which pleased both fans and critics alike, and this album was a double platinum seller. The record opens up with probably the best song on the album and also their biggest selling single from the album, Roll with the Changes, which is a pretty chipper piece of Mom's Apple Pie, a real Americana road trip, upbeat affair. Whilst I definitely love track number 1, track number 2 is a fairly well thought out ballad called Time for Me to Fly, which is a nice track that probably stands up just as well today as it ever did. Pretty much this entire album would find itself comfortably at home on Adam Sandler movies, along with the likes of Styx and Tom Petty. I'm thinking in one of those sports bar scenes which seem to end up in every Adam Sandler movie, or some sort of comedy montage. And that's because it's a pretty good, middle-of-the-road, inoffensive rock album that I'm sure will be entertaining khaki-clad Americans for decades to come. And yes, if you want to dip in to REO Speedwagon, I'm sure you can catch this record down at Not Just Vintage, where it is a very reasonable price, of course. Fish pun. And now it's time for a record from my personal collection, and you've got Rob Hodge to thank for this one over on Facebook. You may remember that Rob requested Wings Band on the Run a couple of weeks ago. Well, this time he has requested Led Zeppelin's In Through the Outdoor. Thanks, Rob. By the time the band had reached their 8th studio album, they were perhaps somewhat worse for wear, and sadly it shows on this record. Whilst band members were battling their own personal demons, collectively they were still trying to find a sound that was relevant in the disco and punk dominated era. The experimentation with styles and sounds really shows on this album, and sadly that means we get nothing that's the equivalent of Dazed and Confused, The Immigrant Song, or even A Whole Lot of Love. The opening track, In the Evening, starts off well enough. It builds up to a really good heavy orchestral thump, but it really doesn't go anywhere and sort of fails to deliver on an early promise. Having said that, it's not too bad a track, and you could happily listen to it on a Led Zeppelin playlist, so long as you had some of their better tracks to wash it down with. Fool in the Rain is a foray into soft rock for the band, with a piano-led jaunt that seems to detour into a carnival-style mid-track interval, but it feels very, very unfamiliar to Led Zeppelin fans. I felt it was just not a nice song to listen to when I was aware that I was listening to Led Zeppelin, a band responsible for some of the greatest rock and roll tracks of all time. I should also mention Hot Dog. Not a bad, jaunty bluegrass toe tapper, but it belongs more in the back catalogue of the likes of Creedence Clearwater Revival and Led Zeppelin, but fairly well put together, and it does appear on rock radio stations on a fairly regular basis, so there's some love out there. I just felt it was the wrong band. By the time we get round to the Wakeman-esque Carousel Alhambra, it's pretty obvious the band is trying to pull out every trick in the book, and also you start to realise that if Led Zeppelin had started their career with this album, then it's unlikely we'd have as many tribute acts as we do today. Probably the most interesting thing, however, about this record was the fact that there were 5 variations on the sleeve. All the photographs on each sleeve are taken from the perspective of different people around the bar taking a look at this guy in the middle. There is a whole story behind it, and the reason it came in this brown paper bag sleeve was so you weren't really sure which variation you were getting. Perhaps that's an indication that the band weren't really confident, or maybe the record company weren't really confident in this record. But nonetheless, it does have people out there who are collecting it to make sure they've got all the records in this particular collection. Overall, it's not a great record, it's fairly inconsistent, and it certainly takes its eye off the prize when it comes to that Led Zeppelin style, because it just doesn't feel like Led Zeppelin. It was the last studio album the band were to produce. They did produce one sort of outtakes album called Coda after this, simply to make sure they fulfilled their contract obligations. But other than that, the band were no more. Sadly, soon after this record came out, the incredible drumming talent that is John Bonham was lost to the world. However, his legacy lives on in the earlier Led Zeppelin records. But now that I've talked this record down, you'll be glad to know that it's not available down at the shop, because this is from my personal collection. However, it is very, very popular with collectors, hence I've got a copy. And so if I get another one into stock, of course, I'll let you know. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much for clicking on this video. Don't forget, we are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, and of course we're right here on YouTube. So please do hit that subscribe button, and don't forget the bell icon, because if you hit this, you'll be notified every time I upload something new. And before I do close out this video, please let me offer a big shout out to the poppy sellers out there. Of course, this is remembrance season, so if you get a few extra quid and you're wondering, should I go down to Not Just Vintage and buy a record from the Quirky Beagle, or should I donate it to the British Legion and buy a poppy? Please buy a poppy. As much as we appreciate your business, we appreciate the members of the armed forces and their sacrifice so much more. So please do buy a poppy and offer your remembrance this remembrance season. In the meantime, have a great few days until the next record, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Take care, guys. Indeed, with this 1978 album, the band kind of found their sound and they stuck to it, which pleased both fans and critics alike. Did I just make a mistake there? Did I throw an extra S in? Please, I think I did.